Welcome to haslipcycleworks. In part 2 of our go-kart build series, we got a lot done, but we ran out of parts. Well, we got some more parts and some hardware, so let's get back to work. One of the first things we got is a hub adapter and a rotor to put on our axle for our hydraulic brake setup. I'll put a link in the description for the hub adapter and the brake rotor. These parts did not come from GoPowersports, they actually came from BMI Karts. We also got our split sprocket. This one is an 83 tooth. I went with one of the highest ones I could get just to keep this thing pretty slow, because again, it is going to be for kids, I believe, so we don't want anything too fast. We also have our hardware to mount our engine to our engine plate. It's 5/16 hardware by 1.5 inches. I went with grade 8. You don't have to. I did just for the extra assurance. We also got a handful of axle collars came in. We've got our torque converter to put on. We've got our front tires to put on. So we got work cut out for us. So let's get into it. And first thing we're going to do is put on our brake rotor and hub. And as you can see, it's not fully assembled. We just have it on there. This is all dry fit and mock up at this point, just to make sure we have all our parts. We'll go back later once we're satisfied that we have everything. We'll tighten everything down, line everything up. But again, this is just mock up and dry fit at this point. One thing that I like to do for when I'm building go-karts and mini bikes is on the axle, on the left and right side of each item that's on the axle, I like to use these axle collars from GoPowersports. Cinch them down once you get whatever the item is. Maybe it's a sprocket adapter, maybe it's a hub or whatever, for two reasons. One, it adds a little more stability to the part so that if it does come loose, it can't slide left or right on the axle. And two, being that if you clock these correctly, they have a notch in them for the key. If you clock these so that, let's imagine that this wrench is the key that's sitting in your axle, and there's the notch that the key would actually kind of slide over. We're going to turn that so that it's not installed with the key in the keyway cutout on the collar. That'll lock that key in place so that it can't just pop out if it gets loose or anything, and then you're left stranded. So I buy these in abundance, whether I need 6 or whatever, or 10 at a time. Use them for other things. I used them to make the clamp section for the pegs on Project Mini Bike, if you remember that. But yeah, these things are handy to have. So yeah, when you go to order these, order more than you expect and just hold on to the spares. But I'm going to put one on each side of everything that's on that axle. So like I was saying, here's our sprocket adapter and sprocket. Once we get it all lined up, and the keyway in our axle and the keyway and the sprocket adapter are lined up, we're not going to line up the keyway cutout on the axle collar. We're actually going to rotate it like 90 degrees out and one on each side. And we'll cut that key the length so it just fits just inside of the sprocket adapter, doesn't stick out, and we'll sandwich two of these axle collars up against it. So that'll keep it from doing this, and it'll also keep the keyway from popping out, causing this to possibly free spin, leaving you stranded. And since our wheels are not the type that mount on a hub, what I'm going to do is put an axle collar behind the wheel, slide the wheel on so that it's just ever slightly past the end of the axle where the washer and the lock nut goes on. I'll cinch that down so that we know that wheel's not going to go anywhere. Now that we have our hardware to bolt our engine down, we'll go ahead and do that. Remember, I'm not going to tighten any of this down. This is all dry fit and mock-up, so no need to blow up the comments section telling me I didn't tighten anything down. Okay, so that's our sprocket adapter on the axle. That's our hub and disc brake rotor on the axle, wheels on the axle, our axle collars in place. I guess the next step, since we got the parts, is to get our torque converter on. So in front of me is our torque converter. This is the Chinese knockoff version of the Comet or TAV torque converter. And well, why did I go that route? Mainly and honestly because of the money. You can get this for right around 60 bucks on eBay or Amazon all day every day versus a couple hundred for the genuine article. Now, because it is a knockoff, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Plenty of guys run these, they don't have any issues. And if you remember, I ran one on Project Mini Bike. Did have a slight issue though, where the torque converter came apart on me, and I know why after doing a little forensics investigation. And yeah, I'll show you why and what to look out for. But because this is a knockoff and it is very, very close to what it's trying to represent, the parts from the Comet can actually be upgrades for this one. So you want to change with the torque converter, there's a lot you can tune, there's some springs you can change, there's some weights you can change, can be upgraded to the actual Comet parts. So to get you in the door and get you a torque converter on your particular project, you can get the knockoff version. It comes with all the same stuff that the Comet does. Probably not in a good a packing, but it's all there. Back plate, everything's there. Like I said, the packing is probably not as good as with the Comet. I've never bought a Comet, so I can't really tell you. It does come with either a 40 or 41 series sprocket or a 35 series sprocket. The tooth count changes depending on which series of chain it's made for, but it comes with both, so you can swap them out. I'm not going to go too deep into how the torque converter works or really the install of the torque converter itself. What I kind of want to get into is how to install one on a 212. They make them to fit a whole range of motors. We're going to focus in on just the 212 and what needs to be changed or modified to get the torque converter on the 212. With my little incident on Project Mini Bike, when the pulley that's actually on the motor came off, this entire assembly came apart, the springs came off, the weights shot out and hit me in the arm, and it hurt like hell. And I mentioned in the beginning, I knew what happened. No components really failed on the torque converter itself. What failed was the bolt that threads into the snout of the crank is rather short. And I cranked it to spec and even had red Loctite on it. What I failed to check and verify was the thread engagement. I had very little, probably that much thread engagement, and yeah, that's bad. So what we're gonna do when we actually install it, do the final install, is I'm gonna replace this bolt with a grade 8 that's a little longer so that we get full recommended thread engagement on the crank so that we don't have this thing coming apart. It's one thing if I'm riding it, this go-kart or a mini bike or whatever the case may be, and it comes apart and I get hurt. But because we're kind of gearing this build towards kids, I couldn't sleep at night knowing that a child that I may know or live near is driving this thing and it could come apart. If you notice, the torque converters have a series of holes in them. That's to fit different motors and in different positions. You can actually clock the whole torque converter up or down depending on how you need to install it. Down there, we actually have to swap that out. That is for 41 or 40 series chain. We're running 35 series chain on this build, so I am going to have to swap that out. It's not difficult. You simply loosen this up, pop this whole assembly off, gear slides out, it's keyed, slide the new 35 series compatible gear in and slide everything back down and snug that back down. When we go to put this on the motor, we're going to slide it right on, and you can see there's the 4 bolt holes that will correlate to the torque converter backplate. Usually the oil fill port / dipstick on these gets in the way, so you may have to shave one of these down or cut it. Well, as much as I wanted to run the giant 80 something tooth count sprocket, I think we're gonna have a problem. We are gonna run into our oil fill cap, but it's in it. We can't access that anyway once the torque converter's on. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut the top of that off, because I'm going to be honest with you guys and show you when I screw up or when things don't go according to plan. Well, this is one of those moments. If you look at the alignment, if this were moved over, this sprocket will pretty much touch that sprocket. And, well, that's not good. So what our solution is either to go with a smaller sprocket, which I don't really care for, because if it was for me, then yeah, I'd go with a smaller sprocket just for higher top speed. But because it's not for me,
I don't want to give up on the big sprocket. So the only other way to do it, and I can't clock this torque converter much higher than it already is, because we're going to start running into the actual cylinder, is to actually build a spacer to go between the engine plate and the actual engine. Of course, that means more material, some sort of probably square stock or rectangle stock, and then of course, if we're going to raise the motor, we need longer hardware.
That means, unfortunately, we're at a stopping point. It's the way it goes sometimes. So I'm going to get that stuff. I'm going to figure out how much of a spacer we need, and don't worry, I'll film all of that and the installation of the spacers, the new hardware, and show you the end result. Plus, we'll also have a bunch of parts that we can install, so it should be a really good next episode for the go-kart build. Until next time, guys, get up, get out there, and do it.